All right, so let's continue. Before we start, I have to warn you that this course is, I'm used to training. Half of the year I train, half of the year I consult. You might have heard me say that. Is very technical, especially towards the end. What I've decided to do is to showcase a little bit about HANA in the SUSE world and how, in my view, easy it is to set up HANA securely and to set up high availability for it if you've got a simple stack scenario. So without further ado, my name is Tinus Brink. I'm the consulting director of a company called SAP Tech. It's very small there, but it's the font we were given. If you need my details, I've got some cards here. You can get it at the end. And if you need a presentation, all of that, you're more than welcome to contact me. And I'll give you the commands and whatever you need to set up everything shown in this demo. I'm going to ask if you really get lost, you can ask a question. But if we can keep the questions to the end, it's very difficult to get through the pace of about 100 odd commands that we have to showcase. Does everyone understand my South African accent very clearly? Cool, awesome. And let's continue. So HANA Replication and SUSE HA Security best practices. It's quite a mouthful. Each of those topics is probably a 2-hour session in itself. But I'm going to talk a little bit about each of them. So we start off with how much is your data worth? That's technically the risk. And to look into it, we state that any company probably thinks that their data is the most valuable asset, and it's becoming more and more true nowadays in any industry. It doesn't matter where you work, they need to protect their data. Nowadays, of course, you've got the laws, etc., that dictate that you need to ensure that your data is also protected. So there's a risk going with your data. You don't just need to protect company secrets, you need to protect the employees' information as well. So we understand, of course, that we can lose data to any type of disaster, potentially. That's why we set up normally disaster recovery scenarios or high availability in the first place. And then, of course, third parties normally want to steal our data. Telemarketers try and phone you and get some information out of you, and they say, "Hi, John," and say, "No, it's actually Philip." "Oh, sorry, hi, Philip." But in any case, so they try to get our data out of us. We've got data for financial information, health information, intellectual property, login information. We need to protect this. If we lose this data, of course, what's the risk? Reputational risk. We get problems with potentially shares that might drop in the industry, or, of course, we have to explain to the users why their data is out there. It's not a very nice scenario. We have to keep the data safe. That's, of course, the impact that I just went through now. So I've got a very unique scenario that I wanted to talk about, which is a data center breach. In South Africa, there was a company that once had a problem where someone came in with a van that was marked as the supplier of the data center. I won't mention who they were. Marked as the supplier of the data center with official documentation, came in and basically loaded up a whole server rack into the van and drove off. It sounds bizarre, but it actually happened. And after it happened, they realized and they tried to figure out what's going on, but their data was gone. So that's, of course, something that could potentially happen. You normally think it only happens in movies, but I've seen it literally happen in real life. If someone wants your data, they can make a plan to get it. So there's a potential of stealing your backups, the potential of stealing the whole blade, as we just discussed now. And of course, possible stolen hard drive. You might decommission them, lose them, not properly erase them. Those are all ways that people can get your data from you. So all of this can leave your data compromised. Focusing on HANA, as we're focusing now, there's a user called the system user. It doesn't matter if you're using HANA 1 or HANA 2. And if you have a whole server rack, you basically have your SSFS keys, and you can get the data even if you don't know the system user, by basically just running your reset system user procedure. Those of you that know HANA would know. I'm not going to go through the whole procedure, but you can Google it, and you can very easily hack into any database if you've got root access, which, by the way, on Linux, you can also hack into. I'm not going to talk about that right now. But in any case, what's the answer to our problem? We need to implement best practice security from SUSE and SAP. You can't just implement one of the two. It's great if you look at security notes from SAP and you implement the latest and greatest, but I believe it's not enough to protect your solution. If you just implement, and we're going to talk about it just now, if we just implement data volume encryption or log volume encryption or encryption on your backups from an SAP perspective, that's good, but it won't technically protect you enough for any scenario. So I'm going to focus on how can we protect that. One of the solutions is potentially looking at a product called Crypt-CTL. So Crypt-CTL, if you don't know it, has been it has been available for quite some time now in SUSE for quite some time, and it's also available to use for SAP-based customers. Borrowed this slide from some of the SUSE training material. To the right there, we can see the Crypt-CTL server, which is the main host that you need to set up. I'm going to go through the whole setup just now, not physically on the machine. I'll leave the demo for the end. But the main Crypt-CTL server needs to be installed. From there are hosts. So I'm just going to call that my central host in my demo. Our two HANA hosts, which in my case is HANA Host 1 and HANA Host 2, would then be able to contact the Crypt-CTL server, request a key to unlock a partition. So with Crypt-CTL, I can look at partitions for HANA data, HANA log, HANA shared, backups, user SAP. Those are all critical, maybe not so much user SAP, could be for logs, etc. But those are all critical file systems in the HANA solution. We want to protect it. So if someone stole my whole server and I've got Crypt-CTL, at boot time, my etc fs tab, it will basically read, I need to start up a partition. As soon as it wants to start up the partition, it would go and find the key on probably a different data center or at least a different host, and only then unlock this drive. If it can't find this key, then of course it can't unlock the drive. So it's one way to secure your data on the drive. Imagine if someone stole that server, the scenario I just started off with in South Africa, the whole server got stolen. As soon as they boot it up, everything on that server would basically be scrambled. It would be garbage for them. They won't be able to utilize it if they had Crypt-CTL installed. So I'm going to run through the whole scenario soon of how do we set it up. If you set up Crypt-CTL, of course, one of the key features that you need in any HANA or SAP-based environment is a firewall. You need to allow for this to work through the firewall. So I just included it here for, just to make sure that everyone understands firewalls are important. If you run a SAP HANA solution, then of course your SUSE for SAP would have a HANA-specific firewall, and you need to ensure that Crypt-CTL is enabled to be used through that host. So basically, it's just port 3737 if you've got your own firewall. I just wanted to highlight it in there. Or you can go and choose Crypt-CTL. It's already listed in the SUSE services as a firewall option that you can select to open the communication. So how do we set it up? I hope everyone can see there, but I'll quickly read it. On the central host, the first host that we need to install it on, we basically use Zipper. I know a lot of people say Zyper or Zipper. I don't know what's the correct terminology around here. I'm just going to call it Zipper if that's okay. In any case, Zipper install -y Crypt-CTL. So -y just basically quickly installs it without asking any questions. And there just ran through. Of course, you need to have all of your various different repositories listed so that you can install this. If you've got SLES for SAP, then automatically you've got access to Crypt-CTL. You can use it. So SLES for SAP is, of course, the only operating system from SUSE that you're allowed to install any SAP solution on. So you should be able to install it on any of your hosts running HANA. Then, from the central host, as soon as we've installed it, we need to configure it. You run another command called Crypt-CTL init server. From there, it will first ask us, what's the password that we want to provide for my certificate? So if my certificate needs to communicate, I'm going to have to remember this password as soon as I set up my hosts that need to use the certificate to decrypt their communications to the central host, to enable it to boot up with these drives. So on the main host, I need to give it a password. It's quite a well, strong password in the normal IT sense of the word, because it starts with 10 characters. There's no special characters that are really required. If you go through the guide or the HA guide or from SAP, then they basically state, just name it secret 1234, which is ironically what I used here, just to make it very easy, but it's not a strong password. Please don't use passwords like that. But it just needs to be 10 characters. It asks you to confirm the password. It doesn't show the password, of course, it masks it. So I did type it in twice. You'll have to believe me there. Then it says it's going to create a certificate, and it's going to auto-generate it for you. So you don't really need to do anything here other than press enter. Then it asks you for the host name of the generated certificate. So in this case, you need to ensure before you run this, I didn't enter it in here, but you need to ensure that hostname space -F resolves a fully qualified name for your host. Because for certificates, it's a best practice to normally have fully qualified names for any certificate that you want to generate. So just make sure your networks is up to date, at least have etc host set up if you don't have a DNS or whatever. So in this case, it resolved to centralhost.sabtech.com. If it only showed central host without my domain, I would have restarted my setup from there and made sure my networks are working. Then it generates a couple of things that are very important. First of all, in the etc Crypt-CTL servlet centralhost.sabtech.com.crt, that's the file for the certificates that we can copy to our HANA hosts to ensure that we can later on set up and configure our drives to basically be encrypted. So we need to remember that, and we'll remember it just now. Then it basically states that you need to copy this file to every single server that needs to communicate to this host. And of course, you need to know what the pass key is, which in this case, secret 1234. Then at the end, it says which server or for the server, where does it need to listen on, and which network interfaces does it need to listen on. The default is 0.0.0.0, which means any network interface. If you want to set it up securely, which I didn't do here, it's probably a good idea to dedicate a specific network that's got a port open that you want Crypt-CTL to work through, where 3737 would be open. But if you don't have an environment where you would worry about that, and all your ports are, in any case, well, for HANA it would probably not be a problem, but on a central host, it might be a SUSE manager running there. It might be the host that's hosting your HANA Cockpit. For those of you that know, HANA Cockpit is the tool that you need to now use for monitoring from HANA 2 onwards. Then maybe you might not have so many network devices. Then you could potentially just say 0000, but it would be a good idea to dedicate a specific IP, or at least have an IP available that you want this to run through. It's not network intensive. Once it decrypted it, you can use the drive. And then of course, any encrypted mechanism, if you're going to ask that question, as soon as the drive is encrypted, whether you're using SAP's method, which I'm going to show you shortly as well, or encrypted hard drives, or the encrypted hard drive through this methodology, it would have some performance impact. When they brought this out, the keys were 4,000 in strength, and they brought it down to 512 just to ensure that it doesn't have such a high performance impact every time we load data to it. So for performance reasons, the encryption key is a little bit smaller, but at least the only way that you can get this key is through the network at boot up time. All right, TCP port 3737, you can change this if you want to. I didn't change it. And then it just states where's the key database directory. And then it asks at the end, should clients present their certificates in order to access the server? It could be more secure, but I just stated no, because I'm going to copy the certificate to every single host. And then it says, do we want to keep it in the KMIP compatible key manager? I selected no, I'm not going to talk about that right now. And if you want to, every time it encrypts or decrypts a specific drive, it can send a message through to an administrator. So if you've got a SMTP relay set up somewhere in your environment and you know where it needs to point to, what's the port 25,000 or 25 or whatever it might be, you can relay your messages, that you can send out messages to your administrator stating, this system just booted up, these drives were decrypted, so that you at least have an idea of what's going on. All right, then at the very end, would you like to start the key server? I just typed in yes, and then it starts Crypt-CTL server on the central host. It seems like a lot, but you can literally copy this screen and run every single point that I'm going to show you in this whole presentation on your own systems, and it would work every time. It's very simple to set up. There's not a lot of parameters, and hopefully it seems easy enough. Then I just added a couple of extra things in there. We can run system.ctl status on the server service just to see if it's running. It should be running. You can just see that it shows active, and it's currently running there. Then I also went and I copied this specific key to my root directory. Well, not /root, but the home of roots, which is /root spelled out. Because I'm going to utilize my root user to copy it across to HANA host 1 and HANA host 2. Then I used SAP to copy it to HANA host 1's home directory of root, and I used SAP to copy it to HANA host 2's root directory as well. So it's just easier for maintenance. It should be in some directory, and technically speaking, a root user is the most protected user in any SAP environment, or for SUSE environment for that matter. So if you copy it to the root directory, then at least you ensure that whatever you've implemented for your root user will protect this key. That's why we normally choose that directory. So on HANA host 1, I ran list block devices. I'm just going to go to the next one as well, -f, and also lsblk straight. So on here, I just wanted to showcase that a lot of people nowadays set up their SUSE environments with BetterFS or ButterFS or whatever you want to call it, BTRFS. And this is technically a problem if you want to set up a HANA directory. Because what happens is, I've got in this scenario VDA1, which I've implemented on its own partition, a very small partition, 100 megs. If this was on a BTRFS partition and I wanted to encrypt this directory, I would basically start off with a create directory called HANA. After I created the directory called HANA, it will then copy the file system parameters, which would make my HANA file system also BTRFS. Now, HANA cannot run on BTRFS. It needs to run on XFS or a supported file system. So if you've got ButterFS, you need to add an additional step. So mine is not set up this way, but when I set it up initially, I did this on purpose. This to show you that if you have BetterFS or ButterFS, whatever you want to call it, you need to create a partition or have a partition where you can create HANA with the correct file system. But it's also very neat. If you already have a HANA solution running and I've got a partition with all the HANA data in it, I just need to partition or provide additional disk. And when I encrypt it, it will copy all the data from /HANA to the new encrypted drive. It will then rename the old drive, as we'll see just now, and I would have a new encrypted drive with all the data already encrypted as well. So it makes it easier. That's the reason why they set it up this way. But it causes that problem that you need to ensure that your file system is correct when you created the directory before setup. So let's go through the setup. If I want to encrypt a drive, I of course need to know which partition do I want to create my encrypted drive on, but we saw it in the previous slide. So I run Crypt-CTL encrypt on HANA host 1. It asks me what's my key server's host name. Unfortunately, in this slide, I ran it once. If you didn't run it, you needed to set up central host or whatever your central host host name would need to be filled in there. Then it asks what's the key service port number, in this case 3737, so I can just press enter. Then it says, what's my certificate for the key server, where is it located? So you need to point it to where it's located. In this case, /root, central host, sabttech.com CRT is the correct path. It asks for that password, which in the initial setup was secret1234. Please use something more secure. And then it says what's the path or directory that I want to encrypt. In this case, it's /HANA, which is already XFS. So I just say /HANA. Then it says, where do I want to create my partition for the encrypted drive? I chose /dev/VDB1. So I basically did not mount a partition, but I created a partition as a straightforward Linux partition in Partitioner. So you need to have at least the final partition set up as a normal Linux partition. At the end, I am connected to the system, so if you want to see some of these additional setups, I can show it as soon as we're done with the presentation. Okay, so dev VDB1. It asks a couple of important questions. How many computers can use the encrypted disk simultaneously? For a HANA solution, it's definitely going to stay at 1. We don't want to share this disk with any other host, first of all. So it's going to be 1. And then, if this computer disconnects, how much time should I give it before another computer can connect to this drive? So normally it would not matter for setting it to any other parameter other than 30 seconds, because after 30 seconds you might fail over to a different data center where this host is running as well. In that case, you would have the key already, and you would want that system to be able to communicate to the central host and decrypt this drive as well. So if you've got a scenario like this, then please don't set this to a ridiculous amount of seconds. 30 is definitely enough. Then it just quickly states what it's going to do. It's basically going to create dev VDB as an encrypted drive. It's going to copy the data from /HANA, already existing data, from that directory into the new HANA directory. So I haven't installed HANA yet. So I would basically just have /HANA as my new drive that I want to install HANA on. If you're on a real life scenario, then it's already not best practice having just /HANA. Just to save time, I just created one partition. But in a normal scenario, you need to have different disks for HANA data, HANA log, HANA shared. You can go through the normal installation guides, but you need to have different disks for each of those physical disks, not just partitions. It says double check, press yes if you're happy. Then it basically created the new encrypted drive. /HANA is now safely encrypted on dev VDB1. And I've got the previous drive, which was, I think it was VD, I can't remember, we'll see now. But the previous drive was encrypted to Crypt-CTL, moved HANA, or unencrypted data was moved there. It was basically just renamed, and the new data was copied to the encrypted drive. So I still need to, this original drive, VDA1, I still need to unmount it, delete the data, format it, whatever I want to do with it, because it's got unencrypted data of HANA potentially on it. If I didn't install anything yet, no harm, no problem, but you need to get rid of this data. There I can see I've got a Crypt-CTL unlocked drive. It already unlocked it. It already copied the data across. And the problem I've got now is if I reboot this machine, it won't start up. It won't start up this encrypted drive because I need to go and edit my etcfs tab first. So I need to look at, that's why I ran lsblk-f, to just note what is my UUID of this specific drive. I then enter a new line, so I can take any line in VI, press YY and then P to basically copy that line, replace it with my UID of the encrypted drive, make sure that it says my drive mounts to /HANA, it's XFS, and then of course at the very end over there, we can see that I've added a parameter called _netDev. That parameter is key because it's a normal partition that's seen as a disk that needs to start up. But because it's technically waiting for the network before it can start up, it needs to find the key and then start up. It will fail if you don't add that parameter. So it needs to add time to wait for the network to decrypt this drive. So you need to add that parameter in there as well. As soon as I've done this, I don't need to reboot the whole machine. I can simply run umount HANA and then mount HANA again, And if it mounted it, it would do exactly the same as it would by reading etcfs tab, and my encrypted drive should show that it mounted /HANA. So all of this makes sense. We're about 10% into the presentation, so I hope so. We leave all the technical stuff to the end of the day, so you're welcome. All right, let's get to a different topic. We've got a couple of things we need to go through before we get to failover. I'm going to showcase a whole HANA failover using HANA high availability at the end. So SAP HANA security. There's important critical configurations that you need to do to ensure that SAP HANA is secure. Probably the most important thing you need to note is your SSFS keys. I'll point it out in the configuration a little bit later as well. But your SSFS keys can be used to encrypt and decrypt with the HANA encryption itself, which we haven't talked about yet, all the data on your disks. So if you get any hardware from a vendor like IBM, HP, Lenovo, whoever, they normally have machines that have been pre-set up with an image from wherever, and they technically then have the capabilities, not that they would, but they technically have the capabilities to decrypt your data. So that data could potentially be seen by an auditor as something that you need to, you need to mitigate that risk. You need to ensure that those keys are changed. So there's a standard procedure in SAP that you can just simply Google, change SSFS keys for HANA. It's taught in the HA200 or HA201 courses in SAP as well. If you've ever done the HANA Tech certification, you probably would have seen this. But that's the most important point. You need to change these keys if you've bought an appliance or even a TDI solution. If someone set up a new HANA solution that's tailor-made for your customer or whatever the case may be. So there's a couple of other things. I'm not going to go through all of it, but you can go through the SAP HANA security guide. They've got really nice references of how to secure your SAP solution. Make sure that you don't have critical privileges, that you don't use the system user. Everyone uses the system user, but system user is the same as using SAP star in the ABAP stack, if you know what I mean. SAP HANA communication channels. This is a very simplistic chart, just showcasing some or a few of the various communication methods we've got to SAP HANA. Of course, SAP HANA Studio, a lot of people argue and they say, do we still need to protect SAP HANA or against SAP HANA Studio? Technically, yes. Because I think HANA 1 SPS 12 is still in maintenance till 2021, or end of May 2021. SAP HANA 2 doesn't have an end of maintenance technically yet, but they need to figure out how long are they going to keep SAP HANA 1 SPS 12 available for their customers. But in any case, HANA Studio is still a viable product to use. And we sorely miss it in HANA 2, by the way. But in any case, with HANA 2, we now have HANA Cockpit. So there's a couple of ports. I just wanted to show some of the ports that we need to be aware of. There's many entry points into HANA. HANA being an appliance and not really just a database where you can create your applications directly on HANA or model directly on HANA, has got many different paths to it for developers, for end users, for administrators. If you think about it, if it was just a normal database like an Oracle database or a Microsoft SQL, you would already pull your hairs out to say, why are my end users connecting to the database directly to get the information? It's because it's designed that way. But of course, there are ways to mitigate this risk. You just need to know about the risk to ensure that you can mitigate it. It doesn't need to be a physical thing. People still tend to mitigate network risks with physical protocols or switches. Everything nowadays is services based. So if I communicate, if I send out a message and I receive a message, it's basically a service communicating to another service. So by mitigating network risks physically is definitely not the right approach, especially if you're using or working with HANA. HANA's got its own encryption options as well. So with HANA, you need to ensure that you set up network encryption for your different hosts communicating to each other. Every single host needs to have its own dedicated network card for host-to-host communications, especially in a scale-out scenario. And then, of course, you can also encrypt your data persistence layer. So your normal /HANA data, /HANA log, backup directories, all of these can now be encrypted. Well, very recently backups with HANA 2 at least. But all of these directories can be encrypted through HANA directly. You don't need to use third-party tools for it. And SAP HANA supports, preferably, the common crypto lib from SAP HANA that you can download for free as a customer to encrypt your drives. Or with SUSE, they already ship OpenSSL, which you can technically also use if you want to encrypt these drives. I've added on here just for ease of use if you wanted to use the information. If you want to enable data encryption using SQL on HANA for data volume, you just simply need to enter alter system persistence encryption on. It will encrypt your whole data layer. I've also added there the redo lock encryption and backup encryptions if you want to set up encryption on those directories. Then you're using HANA encryption using cryptolib or OpenSSL, which is of course supported. If you want to disable the data encryption, which I probably would do if I'm already using Crypt-CTL, using two methods probably is not a good idea. So if you had already encryption set up through HANA and you want to disable it afterwards, it would be a good idea to run these commands to disable it. Then your instance SSF, your secure store in the file system, these keys of course need to be backed up if you're using SAP encryption. I'll show you where these keys are later. It's crucial that we know where they are, because if we want to set up replication between two HANA hosts, we need to copy these keys across to the host that's going to receive the replication from the main host, or the master host as we call it. So I'll show it a little bit later. So managing data at rest encryption, recommended if you installed HANA or a partner installed it for you, or you received the hardware from a partner, you need to change these keys regularly. So they say after handover, the first thing you do is change the key. If you don't, it's an auditable finding. If you get audited by any of the big companies, they will say finding, when did you change the key? And it's already a yellow or red depending on who's auditing your infrastructure, because someone can get your data. And you also need to regularly change it during operation. That of course, I think the recommendation there is at least once a year, or every time you maybe switch between administrators, potentially. All right, so, sorry, the next slide, SAP HANA Replication. So in my demo, I've already set up HANA 1 and HANA 2. In the appendix of the slideshow, if you want it, you can just email it to me and I can send it to you. But in the appendix, I've also included how we've set up the HANA host, how we installed it, how we installed, loss of words here suddenly, the HANA Cockpit, HANA Cockpit 2.0 on the central host as well, which I reference here, but I didn't include, just to save time, all of those installations in this slide. So for SAP HANA recovery, disaster recovery and replication, first of all, SAP HANA has fault recovery support. So recovery time objective can be reduced by just utilizing HANA. Anytime a service is stopped, that service automatically within any HANA host would automatically try to restart itself. So HANA's already designed to restart services. And then of course, I can also have SAP HANA auto restart, and I can also have auto fail over to other hosts. And of course, there they just state that the costs become a little bit higher. If I've got a scale out scenario, which I'm not going to talk about in this scenario, I'm talking about the full one host is replicating all of its data to a secondary host, active, where I can also read on a second host, which is obviously the most expensive way to set it up, but the quickest way to fail over as well. I'm going to talk more about that. So for disaster recovery, we normally use what we refer to as system replication. So they say system replication, of course, has an extremely short recovery time objective, but it comes at high costs. Because if you want to fail over automatically within seconds, which you can do while you're sleeping, you'll receive an email, host failover from your SUSE system, and you can just read it and it say, oh, it failed over. Okay, we need to maybe set up the secondary host. If you want an environment like that, it would obviously cost you a secondary host that needs to be set up. So I'm going to show you now how do we set that up, or very soon. So the way that I went for in this presentation is I'm going to set up system replication, which is active-active. In HANA, that basically means that I can read from both hosts, but I can only write to one host at a time, because it's basically doing lock shipping to the secondary host. So it's actively applying every single change that got changed on host 1 to the secondary host. However, if I want to, I can do my reports to the secondary host. And I can also set up a resource for a virtual IP for my reports to that secondary host. So let's say, for instance, if the host failed over, I can then set up, after I fix the issue, I can then set up replication back again, and I can have a virtual IP for my reports again, even if the data centers swapped. But in any case, SAP HANA system replication modes. There are various different system replication modes. Normally, if you have to replicate maybe to a third host, if you've got host 1 and host 2 that we're talking about here, and you also have a third host that you want to replicate to, we would normally use asynchronous synchronization, which basically means that it sends all the data, but it doesn't wait for a reply back. So it just sends it and it hopes that host is applying it. It's that host's prerogative, or to ensure that if it missed any of its updates, it needs to contact the host and say, please resend it to me. This is, of course, to save time on the network. That's the main reason we would normally use it. Maybe if we're using geo-clustering across borders, etc., asynchronous would be preferable for HANA. Synchronous, there's quite a few different methods that we can use here. If we use synchronous in memory, then your primary system, as it states over there, waits until the secondary system has received the lock. So it just sends it as soon as the buffer in the secondary host received it, it sends back, yes, I've got it. If I want to ensure that it's not just in the buffer, but it's also persistent on disk, so my HANA lock directory on the secondary host also has it on disk, so if there's a failover, it can start up with this lock, then I would probably go for a more secure, which is just synchronous. It's also just the normal sync. This is the default that we normally set up for HANA, for good reason. If the system fails or it switches off and it's not in HANA lock, then you've lost that data, and you don't want that scenario. If you're a bank, potentially, you might go for full synchronous. Full synchronous ensures that it persistently stored it on the secondary host in memory and on disk. And if the secondary host is down and it cannot send any data, then the first host can also not receive any data. So technically, in this scenario, if any one of your two hosts are down, your whole database is basically down. It sounds bad. However, if you're a bank and you're sending millions of transactions every day, you don't want to lose a couple of transactions. It might be a problem. So you might opt to go for full synchronous and rather ensure that all the data that you know you've sent is always there. If you can't receive any data, SAP won't say that it was saved, it won't create the sales order or the transfer, whatever you've done, and your data is still secure. So it depends on the scenario. A lot of people would always argue, I'll always go for this one, I'll always go for that one. It depends on your scenario. Every business case also has a different use case in the technical level as well. So you can't really prefer one above the other. So in the scenario that I've set up, I went for performance optimized, which basically means two nodes of similar spec, or not similar, exactly the same spec, is constantly replicating from host 1 to host 2. So everything that is changed on this host is constantly being applied on the secondary node. But of course, HANA running on SUSE supports multiple different methods. I'm not going to go through all of them, but cost optimize is also a very popular option. It saves you some money because on the secondary host, I can run maybe my development and my quality assurance or test environments, whatever you want to call it. While I'm still replicating across, I'm only storing it persistently on disk. So I've got a very small memory footprint just for the buffer to receive the information and store it down to disk. If my main host goes down, I can automate with SUSE if I want to, switch off dev, switch off QAS, and start up my productive environment on that host. So even if I'm running cost optimized scenario, I can still save time setting up SUSE high availability. I'm not going to go through all of them. But in any case, so the SAP HANA Replication configuration for performance optimized. How does it work? What are we going to set up? So I'm not going to go through all the various different components within the HANA system, but more from a SUSE perspective, what do we need? We need to ensure that we've got a virtual IP being configured at the end of our configuration. So I'm not going to configure it beforehand. I first need to set up CoroSync. I first need to set up SSH between the different hosts, and all of that set up in one command, which I'll show you just now. And at the end of it, I configure a virtual IP, which ensures even if I've got a normal scenario where this IP is hard-coded to the host 1, IP is hard-coded to host 2, as soon as I've set up a virtual IP, I can link my application service or my applications to the virtual IP instead, and it can fail over and still read the data. There's no special configuration you need to do at the end. And for that virtual IP, of course, you can then give a virtual host name. But in any case, all the data, we're going to replicate the data from primary host to the secondary host, and HANA replication needs to be set up first before you set up high availability on SUSE. It needs to be done as a prerequisite. If you don't have HANA installed, if you don't have replication set up, then don't even open any of your SUSE guides, because you're going to waste your time. And that's, of course, why I included those setups in the appendix, if you wanted to know how to do it. So the different replication modes, we went through it very quickly earlier on. I just wanted to include what are the parameters that you can use when you set up these replication modes. So if I set up asynchronous replication, I can use async is the parameter. We'll see it in the command line just now. Well, not async, we're going to use sync. If I set up synchronous in memory, it would be syncmem. The default, of course, like we said, for good reason, persistently in memory and persistently in disk, would be synchronous, which is just sync. And if I want to use full sync, then the replication mode that we can set up or use is just called full sync. There's also operation modes to send the data. So now I'm teaching you a little bit about HANA, which is not really the purpose of why I'm here, but just to understand it a little bit better, because we're going to see it in the config just now. So for the operation modes, if we're replicating between two different nodes, we need to choose how are we sending the data across. The first method is delta data shipping, and the parameter for that is operation mode, delta data shipping. The problem with this is it continuously sends logs to the secondary host, but it never applies them to that host. Instead, by default, every 10 minutes, it will copy the memory from host 1 to the memory of host 2. So the first problem that I normally have with this method is I see a spike on the network. A lot of people, especially if you're in the banking industry once again, or if in a specific industry that maybe manufactures weapons as an example, you would look for these spikes. So it will really irritate your network guys if they see huge spikes because of a memory dump from one host to another host. So that's one reason you maybe don't want to set it up, but you still have all the logs on the secondary host. If you need to fail over, then at least the good thing is that only the last 10 minutes of logs needs to be applied. So you don't have to wait for the whole recovery of the whole solution. So it's still better than a backup restore at least. Continuous log replay and continuous log replay with active-active works in a similar manner. The parameter for continuous log replay is just log replay, and it continuously sends the logs to the secondary host, and it also continuously applies them. So in my case, the previous parameters that we had, I set up log replay read access, and I also used parameter sync. So it's sending the data across, and I can actively read the data with read access on the secondary node. So I can do reporting on host 2. So I can save the resources. If I'm using the secondary host, at least it's not just sitting there waiting for host 1 to fail, which, by the way, happens almost never. I don't know how many times you guys had data failovers or hosts failing over, but in a well-maintained environment, it rarely happens. But in any case, so with the read access, I can ensure that I can read the data on that secondary host all the time. With sync, of course, I can ensure that it's persistently on disk and it is available in memory. All right, so the first method that I wanted to show you, I'll get to, I know us Linux guys like the commands. I'll show you the commands just now. That's the way I set it up. But I also set it up using HANA Cockpit. So if I want to set up replication using HANA Cockpit, I've included in the appendix how to install HANA Cockpit. It's 2 commands. It's basically in SAP, we call it a SAP archive file or a .sar file that I just need to execute, and it's 2 commands and you've got it installed on a system. It installs a fully fledged HANA solution or database that you can manage your whole environment, including HANA 1 and HANA 2 systems. But in any case, from there, we can log on with our Cockpit admin user. I've set up the 2 databases on HANA host 1, which is 10.00.53 and 54 to my secondary host already. And then I needed to ensure that before we set up replication in HANA, I first need to take a backup of my solution. I didn't screenshot it here, but I'm going to give you the command that you can use on any environment just now. And then afterwards, I also needed to ensure that the SSFS data and key files are copied to the secondary host from the primary host. If I don't do that, then I cannot set up replication because it cannot decrypt the data. And then, of course, I can configure my replication. So this is using HANA Cockpit. So as soon as I click Configure Replication, I would give it a site name for my master and a site name for my secondary host or my slave node, as they sometimes call it. A lot of people, if you go for training even, they say, please call primary, primary, and secondary, secondary. I would suggest that you never do that. As soon as you fail over, it gets very confusing because then it says primary is, primary is secondary and secondary is primary, and then you're trying to figure out what's going on. So if they're situated in 2 different data centers, rather just say data center 1, data center 2. If your 2 hosts are on the same data center, maybe use the host names like HANA host 1, HANA host 2. Then at least you know which physical boxes you are currently talking about, which one is master and which one is my secondary node. And then, of course, you can choose your different options. Synchronous in memory, lock replay is the one I chose here. Not my preferred one, by the way. And then as soon as you've set it up in HANA Cockpit, you can see that it's running. All of these you can also see on OS. I'll show you the OS commands just now. And you can then also see in the HANA Cockpit that it's currently synchronized and it's running very similar to what you might have seen in HANA Studio. You can now see for your whole environment in HANA Cockpit. If you're a Linux guru, oh, where's my commands? Did I skip it? I think it's still coming up a little bit later. But in any case, I'll show you those commands just now. I think it's at the end. So just very quickly, SUSE high availability. Couple of things that we need to know. Key features for SLES for SAP, first of all, live kernel patching. I'm not going to talk about it now, but you probably know by now that you can patch your SUSE solutions live. It's the same for SUSE for SAP. High availability is why we are here. System rollback, things like BetterFS helps us to ensure that if it's similar to a snapshot methodology. Every time I change configurations, I can roll back these configurations as well. We've got remote storage encryption, which I just use very like Crypt-CTL. I'm not going to talk about this just now, but these are standard features that you get with SLES for SAP. So as soon as you purchased HANA, your vendor would have installed it on SLES for SAP. Your license will entitle you to have all of these features. And in the industry, I'm yet to go to a single customer using high availability. And they'll say it's dangerous, it doesn't work, whatever, because they're used to these little monitors working on the network or being dependent on the network, which was the starting configurations of high availability. We passed that now. We're using storage, we're using stone of block devices, and it's a lot more secure. So if you don't set up high availability for SUSE for your environment, then you have to state, all right, I don't like sleep, and I like being woken up 2 o'clock in the morning to drive to the office or log in remotely and do the work myself. There's no reason why at least the first failover cannot be handled by SLES. If you want to ensure that the failback happens manually, fine. But the failover, first of all, if you're a 24/7 operation, why would you not go for it? It just doesn't make sense. In any case, SUSE high availability features. There's all the nice features. I'm not going to go through all of them. Data replication, unlimited geo-clustering, virtualization ready. So I set all of my environments up using KVM, but of course you can set it up on things like VMware, whatever your choice might be, Azure, Google Cloud, all of them are supported. All right, so it seems I'm at the live demo. I think I've set up those other settings later on. So after the, maybe can I leave the live demo for the end, if that's okay? I just wanted to show you a couple of best practices first. So SLES best practices, just to talk about very quickly. For SLES, it's recommended to use SUSE Manager to manage your SAP environments. SUSE Manager makes it easier to ensure you've got the latest patches, you're monitoring your system correctly. If you haven't seen SUSE Manager yet, I'll encourage that you go to one of the sessions where they talk about SUSE Manager. It's a product that you can use already for an SAP SUSE environment, and it's available. Batch management, service pack applications, subscriptions, making sure that your subscriptions are up to date, that it can be patched, all done centrally from SUSE Manager. So some of the benefits, it reduces cost, complexity, there's change control, compliance tracking, when did I patch it, where's the logs, auditability, all of it's already in one central place. Then from SAP HANA, I'm not going to go through this, I've included all of the various different SAP notes, but SAP HANA gives some nifty tools that a lot of people don't know about, which are very, very useful. So we call these Python scripts. So there's a graphical SAP HANA administration tool on Linux available called HDB Admin. If I want to automate the cleanup of HANA Trace, HANA Log, and HANA Backup catalog files, there's already a tool for it called SAP HANA Cleaner. These are all tools that you need to know about if you're running a HANA environment. Your logs, if you forgot to back up or there's an issue with your backups, get filled up very, very quickly. You need to ensure that you maintain those. There are tools to help you maintain it. I'm not going to go through all of them now. And then, of course, Solution Manager, SAP's version of SUSE Manager. So SAP also has their own manager tool. This is used to monitor your whole environment, which of course is SAP ABAP, Java, or HANA-based applications. So your whole landscape can be monitored centrally. And it can also give you, it can also get information from SUSE Manager for logs and information on the OS as well. So SAP and SUSE luckily have a really good partnership, and of course, we always joke about it. SAP's, or our general manager that's also in the audience here, told me earlier, you know that SAP's colors are blue and yellow, and what happens if you mix those colors together? You get green. So that's why the partnership is so stable. But in any case, so system and application monitoring, we can do that from Solution Manager, root cause analysis and exception management. Root cause analysis, a very, very exceptional tool. If you've got an end user sitting across the borders in a different country, connecting to their own portal system that needs to retrieve information, maybe with an interface in a different country on a different system, if they get an error, how do you trace what happened? So you can use SUSE root cause analysis to figure out, is it the network, is it my database, is it the end user's PC? All of that can be defined in a root cause analysis, and you can get screenshots and all of that as an administrator while doing a root cause trace. So it's very, very useful tools already provided by SAP. Technical analytics and dashboards. You can also get live stream views of what's happening in my environment. Is it backed up? Is it working well? Etc. And then administration and guided procedures, a very new nifty feature. If I want to do guided procedures in SAP, I can, without knowing how to perform the whole implementation of root cause analysis as an example, I can follow the guided procedure. It will just say, go and look for this, enter this, and it sets up the whole environment for you. So Solution Manager is very good in setting up technical procedures or technical implementations for HANA and SAP-based products as well. Couple of recommendations to keep your data secure. Read the guides. That's the first recommendation. A lot of times we go to customers and they've implemented something and they say, well, I did this in training and I tried it now and it didn't work. And I say, well, show me the implementation guide that you followed. And then they show me the training material. It just doesn't work. If you want to implement any new solution, you need to start off with what's my latest guide for the OS, what's my latest guide for SAP. It sounds strange if you've done it 100 or 10 times or whatever, but you get the latest information. Where can it fail? What security notes do I need to apply, etc. Those are really good recommendations you only get in the guides. Patch your environments regularly. Use encryption where possible. And then, probably the most important, use certified resources. Ensure that if someone is working on your HANA solution, they've got the recommended certification from SAP, which is the HANA Tech certification. It's the only certification that allows you to perform a migration to HANA as well. If you've got a TADM70 certification, TADM70 does not allow you to migrate using the tool that we refer to as SUM or SAP Update Manager to migrate to HANA. You need HANA Tech. Ironically enough, if you're migrating to the cloud, Google Cloud, Azure, etc., then you need a TADM70 certification. Use certified SUSE Linux administrators to manage your SUSE environment. You would not have an uncertified person work on your car, but a lot of people use uncertified resources to maintain the most valuable asset for a multi-million-dollar company. It just doesn't make sense. Sorry, I seem to say it a lot, but it doesn't. So my recommendation is, if anyone needs to work on an SAP environment running SUSE, this is my minimum setup. If they're going to use Linux Enterprise Server, they at least need to get the latest certification, which by the way now is 15, not 12. But you can still get certified on 12 and you can get a bridge over course to 15, which is also now available. So SLE 201, basic administration, which is already enough to administrate an SAP environment at least. 221 gives you the specifics of what makes SUSE unique for SAP. So that's a recommended course to go through. And by the way, also a certifiable course. So you can add that extra stamp that I can administrate SUSE for SAP if you also do that course and the certification. 301, engineer, helps with advanced topics like scripting. And then 321, which is going to be the setup that I'm going to show you now basically, and in a nutshell, is high availability clustering with SUSE Enterprise Linux. Training for administrators for HANA. The recommended courses is HA 100, which teaches you the basics of HANA. HA 200 talks about installation administration. What are the various different ways that you can set it up? 201 is high availability for HANA and disaster tolerance administration. It's a very new course. And 215, using monitoring and performance tools, like some of the tools I showed you early on. How can I use these tools in my environments? All right, before we get to questions and answers, I'm going to go to, where is it? I think I didn't open it yet. So what I've done to save time, because I've made a little short note of all the commands for high availability, only about 4 pages worth of how to set it up, but I recorded it. At the end, I do have a live environment running. I can maybe quickly show it to you. So there's my live environment that's running. Whoops. But I didn't want to rely on it because it's running out of South Africa, which is where I'm from, and it might be a little bit delayed over the internet. But at the end, we can play with it and break it if we want to. I just want to show you the recording first, which is just easier to go through the various different commands that we need to enter. Before we start, any questions so far?
A question. How long it usually takes to deploy all of the environment? I mean, from starting the installation and to have the system deployed, I mean, an average time you usually see?
So if I want to deploy dev, QA, prod with high availability. The technical setup is very quick. To install HANA, 2 to 5 minutes. SUSE, you might know, doesn't take too long as well. Unless you do the recommended way, which is updating the packages, then over the internet it takes a little bit longer. But the time that I normally add to these kinds of projects is for all the red tape at the customer. So that's normally getting access to the networks, ensuring that I've got root access on the OS, etc. That can sometimes take weeks.
That doesn't have any relation with HANA.
Yeah, so if there's nothing to do with HANA. So if there's no red tape, I can set up, and any of my consultants can set up an environment for dev, QA, prod with high availability within a day. It really is not, if you've got all the commands which I'm technically giving to you and which is already available on SUSE's website, I'll showcase where those guides are, etc. And I've also got them here if you want to copy them, by the way. Already gives you all the information you need. It's just a matter of going through it and knowing what to enter and what are the different steps. If you do it the first time, I normally give it as a challenge to my guys. So they normally take, for the first time that I set up high availability, it normally takes them about a week on average. Because they need to figure out how to do it. I don't like spoon feeding the guys. I normally throw them in the water and wait for them to swim. All right. Any other question? Yes, sir.
If anybody's interested, we have a hands-on session where we actually install HANA on a SUSE cluster tomorrow at 2 o'clock.
Awesome.
So it's a hands-on session that you're interested
That's
in.
probably about 2 hours or something like this.
And a quarter.
Yeah.
And we can do it a little bit faster than that, but we
You don't have to go as quick as I'm going through it.
yeah.
Awesome. That's useful information. Yes, sir.
I have 2 questions. One, for the encrypting the disk.
Yeah.
With the volume group, logical volume, it's the same that you described, or change something?
All right. So using Crypt-CTL and volume groups. Johan, do you know if we can do that on volume groups? I don't know. I normally... Is it? Yeah, because it's technically looking for a partition, and you get a UUID for a volume group, so it's probably possible. So I guess so, but in HANA it probably won't make sense, and I'll tell you why. For another environment, probably web server, etc., it might make sense. But for HANA, your disks need to be physical disks. If it's going to be a volume group on a big system where it's terabytes, then yes, the volume group would probably need to be encrypted. If you've got a volume group for 20 disks in a RAID array, etc. Yeah, then it would work, yeah. It's a UUID.
The other one question is about social manager.
Yes?
You say, I don't know if I don't understand, but you say that SUSE manager, social manager can take data from SUSE manager?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it can. So it's quite recently that we can get data from it. There's not a lot of information on it in training courses, but there's a lot of information on it online. If you go in the full scope of Solution Manager with SAP, you get about 5 different types of speciality in it already, where you've got about 10 different certification paths just for Solution Manager. So it's a very specialized path in SAP.
I use Solution Manager for monitoring.
Okay.
But I don't know that is...
But you probably don't do end-to-end business monitoring.
We monitor many HANA instances, S4 HANA and HANA instance, but we never connect other part application.
Okay. Yeah, you can. All right. I'm going to get to the demo because it's quite a lengthy one, but a lot of it, I'm just going to press next for the command. I've used, if you're interested, just to make the demo quicker, I've used Adobe Creative, which is a very intuitive tool. Just basically set it up. So, as an example, if I press next over there, you can see my first command. So, is this a little light? Yeah. So, zipper in -t pattern HA_slash. That's the first thing that needs to be installed. If you installed slash for SAP, then you can select it at installation time. But I realize a lot of people don't select it at installation time. So I just wanted to show that you need to choose the pattern for HA/, which combines all the high availability packages together in one command to be installed in one case. So for me, it said nothing to do because it was already installed. Next, you would need to run zipper in -y SAP HANA SR and SAP HANA SR -doc. So these various different packages that you need to install is to ensure that I've got the resources or resource agents available for HANA specifically. So if I just set up HA/, yes, I can set up high availability, but I cannot configure it for HANA without installing these packages. So you need to say SAP HANA SR and SAP HANA SR doc. So those OCF different types of services that you'll see later on. Then going over to my next node, I basically needed to do the same. So every single node, HANA's already installed on here, replication's already set up. It's a prerequisite. I need to do it. So there, of course, make sure HA/ is installed. Make sure those two packages are installed as well. Then next, let's go back to my first node over here. The next thing we would do is we would need to set up my STONF block device. So the STONF block device, from my experience, it works well if you set it up before you set up your cluster. In the menu it says you can set it up during HA cluster init, but in any case, I set it up before I set up the cluster. So you need to have a device. What I did is from my central node, which is in my environment 10.00.52, I set up a shareable disk as small as possible. You literally need megabytes. As small as possible, which unfortunately with my KVM environment was 100 megs, but in any case, and shared it as modifiable between my two different HANA nodes and mounted it to them simultaneously. So after I've done that, I would then run SBD -D to this specific block device. So you can obviously run LSBLK to just see which block device I want to use, or partition if you use Yast or whatever, and then just run create. Then it created for me the block device, and if I were to go, and I can maybe show it to you very quickly, if I were to go between the two different nodes, if I say SBD space -D def VDC dump, even though I set it up on host 1, it's readable by both nodes. I can see that it's actively reading the same information, which is of course important. You need to ensure it works on both nodes. Sorry, I'm going to take this off because it's constantly messing with my mic. Just put it in my pocket. All right, then the next step, the command I just ran, I would say SBD -D def VDC dump just to ensure that it was created correctly. As soon as I've done that, I'm just going to quickly press forward a few times. You can either use, I used echo softdog to etc modules load d watchdog.conf and echo this parameter into etc sysconfig /kernel. You can also VI these two files. They don't exist in your environment until you create them. This is just a short way that I find easier to create them. Or you can just say VI, and there you can see I just ran cat on watchdog.conf. It creates softdog into that file. And if I run cat on the kernel, it runs init-rd modules and that parameter softdog at the end. So these are important to create because we need to run, well, we're not running it yet. I'll show you just now that we need to run it. We need to run mkinit-rd to ensure that it builds this block device so that the system kernel understands it's got an SPD device. So softdog is a nice way to test an environment if you don't have a watchdog built on your hardware. So that's why we normally use it in training or testing environments. You can technically use it in a live environment as well, but it's normally preferable to use the watchdog that's maybe built into your hardware already, might be preferable. But in any case, so I quickly ran this, then I would run mk init rd Oh, wrong command. I'm ahead. You see, this is a problem with a live demo. I first ran clear, which I didn't see. And there's another parameter that I forgot about. So in the etc sysconfig /spd, I just made this file a lot shorter. If you see it in real life, you would see a lot of information explaining each and every single parameter that's in there. So I just shortened it, and I VR'd it earlier on. So you can see, is this block device going to rely on pacemaker? Yes, it's important that it needs to be set up. What's the block device path? Def VDC is what we're going to use. So it's unpartitioned, which is also an important thing. It doesn't need to be partitioned, unpartitioned. If you were to partition it, it's going to erase that in any case when you set it up later on. SPD start mode, by default, it's not set to clean. We set it to clean for HANA specifically. And then the delay start needs to be set to yes, just to ensure that it gives time for the secondary host to clean itself, or for you to issue a command as well. So you'll probably see that in the workshops tomorrow, I'm guessing, as well. But in any case, let's move on. Now I can run mk init rd to create this device. And you can see over here that it built the device in the system now. It gave it a UUID, but this UUID you won't typically see as a normal block device if you run lsblk, by the way. And there we can see that it created the image file for this device, etc. as well. So it's specifically configured for softdog on the StoneF block device. So I needed to build the kernel parameters, run this command, and now I officially have SPD configured. If I now were to go SPD space -d /dev vdc list, I would see that it would show clean on the hosts where it is configured. So currently configured on one host in my environment. So we need to perform the same on the secondary node as well. So echo the same commands. I'm just running through it a bit quicker. mk init rd as well to build this device. And then I need to copy from my 53 node or reset it up on the 54 node my etc sysconfig spd file. So this is those 6 parameters: clean, dev vdc, pacemaker yes. That configuration file I just copied across to the secondary node. So SSH using encryption keys is not currently set up yet. And the reason it wasn't set up yet, high availability requires SSH with encryption keys to be configured. But I left it out because the cluster is going to set it up for us. If you just run through it, you don't need to run through the whole thing, create SSH keys, copy ID, etc. The cluster can set it up for you. In any case, are you sure you want to continue? Yeah, I'm just going to press next here. I said yes, and it copied it across. After we copied it across, we're on page 2 now, if you wanted to know. We can go back to 10.00.54, run mk init rd, and it created the StoneF block device to start up on this node as well. So now it would list both nodes as clean, at least, if I were to check it. All right. Then we need to do a couple of additional things. First of all, see, I even added in commands like clear so we can see a bit better. But in any case, I'm just going to press next because it's quicker. We need to run modprobe space softdog, and this is to add the loadable kernel module for the softdog to the boot up kernel as well. So after I've added this, my softdog is also working in the scenario. I need to do this on both hosts. So if I go to the secondary host, I just ran clear here as well. Same thing, modprobe, softdog, and it's configured on both of these devices. Now I've got a StoneF block device configured. I've also got softdog configured for my system to be used by the StoneF block device. I don't have high availability yet. And of course, I've got 2 nodes which replication is already set up in. All right, let's just quickly have a look. Went back to the first node and we ran the command. I do apologize for that yellow. I didn't realize I wanted to use the white color to make it easier to see, but unfortunately that's yellow and I didn't change the color fonts. But in any case, now we run the command on the first host that we want to set up, HA minus cluster minus init. It does complain about one thing. It says that cronid.service, which is corosync basically, is currently not configured. Do you want to continue anyway? We're going to say yes, because this setup is going to configure everything that's missing. So in this case, we just say yes. It tells me that my root SSH ID RSA already exists. If you set it up the first time, it won't exist. But mine existed because I was a little bit lazy in reconfiguring it after I decommissioned my configuration. But in any case, I just said yes, I want to reconfigure it. It generates SSH keys in configured corosync 2 as well, and then or csync 2. And then of course, these keys, when I entered the join command later on, would then be copied by host 2. So your HA cluster needs to ensure that root can communicate between the hosts without a password. So you need to have your SSH keys generated. So you cannot set up high availability at the moment without it. But in any case, csync 2 is already configured. Do you want to overwrite it? I just said yes so you can see it. etc corosync auth key already exists. Overwrite yes. So normally it would configure that. And then it says etc corosync conf already exists. Reconfigure that as well. Then it says network address to bind to. So what is the range of IPs between my nodes? So it's 10.0.0.53 and 10.0.0.54. So it picks up that my range is going to be 10.0.0.0. Is that correct? If so, we can simply press enter to continue. By default, it's also going to set up a multicast address. I changed this afterwards to unicast. But in any case, we'll get into it just now, how we can change it, because it's preferable if you've got a, how can you put it, a simple failover scenario between two nodes to rather use the unicast setup. In any case, so even if it's setting up multicast now, we'll change it just now. What's the port? 5405. I normally don't change it. And then it says the pacemaker auth key already exists, configure it yes. And then, very importantly, because I've already configured the SPD device, do I wish to use the SPD? Do I wish to use SPD? I would say yes. SPD is already configured to use on dev VDC. Do I want to override it? No, because I already configured it. What I've configured so far for the Stone of Block device would work. So I just said no over there. Then it goes through a couple of things. It also states here that technically my cluster is now configured, by the way. If I were to say CRM mon, I would see that I've got a cluster running with my Stone of Block device already added as a resource. However, it also at the end says, do I want to configure administration IP address? So technically, yes, you can. I opted not to do it because I used my administration IP address for Hawk, which in this case I'm going to make 10.0.0.55, and I want to set it up differently. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to set it up in a manual manner just now. But you can technically configure it here already if you wanted to. I just said no in my configuration. So then we would normally run crm_mon, which I just showed you earlier on in the live system as well. It just had many more resources if you saw over there. And there we can see that currently I only have a Stone of Block device configured, and the only host connected so far is HANA host 1. So it's not really highly available, but there is one resource and there's one host attached to it. I can press Ctrl+C to go out there. Moving on, I need to configure a couple of additional things. So I said clear, and I need to change some key parameters. I need to get rid of multicast and change it to unicast as an example. So I would run the command system_ctl stop pacemaker to stop my full environment. If I were to run crm_mon now, it will basically just end up in a loop, trying to connect to a resource that is not currently running. But in any case, after I ran that, I can then basically change my configuration. So I'll just quickly showcase to you. I ran cat etc corosync.conf. Just make sure there's no spelling mistakes, because as soon as I press next, you won't be able to see it. So I've already VI'd it, but with the recording, I just thought it's easier to record cat rather than the whole VI process. But in any case, so from here, as soon as we now press next, things that I've changed is I've changed the crypto hash and the crypto cipher to none. I've removed, normally you can just actually hash it out, but to make it a little bit more dense, I've actually removed all the different spaces. If you see this in your live system, you'll see very big spaces between them. So between the different tags, I've just removed all the spaces. So I took out the whole multicast process, and I added in the transport to be UDPU, which is basically unicast. I've added in the node list to say that I've got a node for ring 0, which is my first node, 10.00.53, and my second node, which is 10.00.54. As soon as I've edited this in the one host, of course, I probably need to copy it across to the second node as well. Let me just see where we are now. So on the second node, I need to start pacemaker first. I almost forgot about it. After I've made the configurations, as soon as I say system start pacemaker, if it doesn't complain, great. You now have a unicast HA cluster running on one host. That's the accomplishment we have so far. So just moving on. I just added in there CRM-mon just to show that it's currently running. And then, of course, we need to go to the secondary node. Now we need to add this node to join it to the cluster. For this, we run HA minus cluster minus join. And it says, do you want to continue? Chrono D service is not running. We're going to configure it now, so we say yes. Then it says, what's the IP address or the host name of the current node that is running? So I add it in there, 10.00.53, which is my main host, where I ran my init command. Then from there, it then says it's retrieving the SSH keys. It asks for the password, which I technically needed to enter in there. And I says I've got new SSH keys installed. So now, because these keys are installed, I can say SSH to root at HANA host 1, and it will work, and vice versa without passwords, which is required by my high availability system. Then it picks up from the configuration file that I've edited earlier on that for ring 0, the current node is 10.00.54. Is that correct? I can simply just press enter. Then it set up my whole environment for me. I now need to configure various different resources. So for this, let's just have a look. I go to HANA host 1, and in this case I've created various different TXT files, which is also the recommended way that we set it up in the SUSE high availability manual. You create TXT files. From there, the first resource I created was crm-bsdt.txt, and very importantly, after I've installed the pattern for HA/, I needed to add those two different packages as well for the SAP resources. If I did not add these packages and I tried to add any of these resources in, it will fail for SAP. But in any case, so basically say, is it going to use StoneNerf? Yes. What's the timeout for StoneNerf? Resource stickiness for this device. I'm not going to talk about all of this right now. I'm just focusing on the HANA failover. After I've configured this, or I VI'd this in a file, and this you can copy and paste into any environment, obviously just changing important things like your own IP, your own SID for HANA, your own instance number, it will work. Then I say CRM configure load the update of the first resource, and it loaded it in. The second resource, is my SAP HANA topology, is technically what we call it. I just named it SAP HANA top.txt, which is the same naming convention they use in your SUSE guide. So all of this comes straight out of a normal SUSE guide. We created the first primitive resource, which is SAP HANA topology. I changed the name to my current SIT, my instance. And then, of course, I needed to add in different parameters to what's my SIT and what's my instance number as well. Then I can simply just run the load and update of this resource. So I'll go through it a little bit quicker. At the end, CRM SAP HANA TXT also needs to be added in there. So there it talks about what's the default that it's going to do. If, for instance, let's see over here, is the automated registration, I've set that to false, which means after it failed over, I would need to register my host again. So that you can set up. First of all, it will fail over, but it won't automatically fail back. And the reason for it's quite simple. Depending on how big your database is, you want to allow time for the HANA database to start up properly. You want to ensure that all the data on the logs have been added in. If something went wrong with that first host, it can't fail back to another failed system. One system needs to fail over properly at least. So for HANA, this is normally the default that we would set. Then moving on, we're nearly done. I would load this into the resources, and then I've added in my own virtual IP. So the virtual IP, which I also use as my administrative IP, is 10.0.0.55. But the actual reason for this IP is for my applications to connect to HANA. So it doesn't matter which resource it fails over to, it would use 10.0.0.55 as my actual IP. All right, we also load this resource into the environment. Sorry, I wanted to take a photo there. There you go. You can also get this demo from me if you need it. In any case, after we've done that, we also need to load the last resource over here. This resource is actually pretty important. It ensures that something like my IP always searches for my MSL resource stating which host is currently the master. So if I look at my configuration over here, if I say CRM_mon, then I can see that it shows, in my case, this one already failed over. Master is currently HANA 2, which means my IP address is also running on HANA host 2, the 10.0.0.55. So this piece of configuration is actually very important to ensure that it always follows which node is currently mastered. That's where my virtual IP is currently running. Interestingly enough, which I didn't set up, if you're running an active cluster and you want to monitor on the secondary node, you can also set up a secondary IP to always follow the slave node to ensure that you can also have your various different reports running on the node being replicated to. All right, then we also loaded that in. As soon as I run CRM_mon, CRM_mon, like I just did in the live system, we can then see that I currently have a master and the slave node configured. And then if I go to Hawk, I didn't show it here, but I'll show it to you now. By default, it runs on port 7630, I think is a default port, and it uses the username HA cluster and the password Linux. So it can run on any single node. In this case, I ran it on the 10.0.0.55 because if the cluster failed over, Hawk will always work. Doesn't matter which node it failed over to. But I can see all my resources is configured over there as well. Then I just quickly did a test over here, and I'll show you an interesting live test on the live system just now. So on HANA host 1, I ran HDB stop. HDB stop, I first ran switch user to sit ADM user for HANA, which is my tech ADM. Then I ran HDB stop, which actually stopped my HANA host 1 solution. And as soon as I stopped it, and I go to host number 2, and I ran CRM_mon, what has happened? The new master became HANA host 2, And then, of course, it just shows me that the current resource, SAP HANA Tech HTTP00 on HANA host 1 is not running. So it's picking up there's a problem, and my IP address moved over to HANA host 2 from HANA host 1. Now, what do I need to do? How do I fail back? Is, of course, the important question you need to ask yourself. So first of all, I created a little command for myself. So interestingly enough, if you want to register a HANA host to be replicated from the main host, you actually need to run the SR register command, or use, quite simply put, HANA Cockpit if you want to use the graphical interface. But working in Linux, this is actually a lot quicker. So I just ran the cat on a register underscore HANA host 1.sh. So I normally create these scripts on both nodes. If it failed over, all I need to do is I just simply need to go to SU Tech ADM, make sure my host is stopped, my HANA solution is not running, so run HTTP stop again if you want to, and then run /register HANA host 1.sh. Then it will configure this to be a replication node, and I can then test this. How can I test it? I can run the following command. Oh, sorry, just wanted to show another command. I'll show you the command just now. I forgot the sequence of my demo a bit. But in any case, I also need to run a cleanup of the resource which showed earlier on that on HANA host it failed. So I say CRM resource cleanup for HANA Tech or SAP HANA, the system tech on HTTP00 for HANA host 1. So if I run this over here, let's quickly run it. It then basically says that it's cleaned up this host on HANA host 1. And now it should report that HANA host 1 is now my slave. So by simply creating 2 scripts on each node, you can run them in succession and you can anytime just fail back. So the resource that's administrating it doesn't need to be a HANA guru. He just needs to be able to read whatever the script is telling him. So SAP also gives us a couple of features that we can use, which I'll quickly show to you. So if I go to SIT-ADM, there's a script by SAP called hdbsettings.sh, and I can call the Python script system replication status.py, and it will tell me on any host what is the purpose of this current host. So if I don't have HANA Cockpit, or I don't have the capabilities to quickly see the status, I can just quickly say, all right, this is site name HANA host 1. Currently the active primary site is 2, which is HANA host 2. So at least get an idea, is it active, the HANA replication part, which currently is. So I quickly want to show you one live demo, if that's okay. It will take only a second. So let's just quickly have a look again. So currently my master is HANA host 2 and my slave is HANA host 1. So what I actually want to do is I want to open up the CRM monitor over here. Okay, it's already open on my slave node. And let's top the host a little bit differently. So I've created over here, which of course is a terrible idea. If I say cat do not run, this is an exercise in your HA setup, by the way. Yeah, never do this on the system. It's a terrible idea. That's why I'm teaching it to you. So if I say echo B to proc sys rkey trigger, what will happen? Do not run. The system automatically crashes. So this is like pulling out the power cord out of the box. You can already see it starting to complain. It's saying here, master HANA host 2 is unclean. So now we can see the live monitor. And we see, oh shucks, IP address, everything here is unclean. So now, what is it going to do? Hopefully this demo works well. This one I didn't prepare for. But it is supposed to fail over. Let's have a look. And you can monitor it. You can just say CRM_mon on the one host. And there we can see promoting HANA host 1. And it's starting the host 1. So high availability for SUSE is actually now managing the SR takeover command, which is something you normally have to issue manually. That's where you get the call for, you run in and you wipe your eyes and you're like, oh, it's failed. Now I need to quickly run SR takeover or first figure out what's happening. At least here it's figuring it out by itself. And then it says promoting HANA host 1. And then of course, well, you're more than welcome to wait for it. But as soon as it's finished, we will then see that HANA host 1 becomes the master. Any guess? Any questions? Very easy demo, right?
One question, why do you prefer to create a SUSE device before and not using this script, init cluster, whatever? Because it has the same option, right? Some bad experience in the past, or?
I think a bad experience in the past is probably the best correct answer. And from there, that's basically what I'm used to. But it's also a good idea to know how to set up the individual steps, because if something goes wrong, it's easier to figure out what went wrong if you know how to set up the individual steps. So probably yes, bad experience is actually a good answer.
Yeah, sometimes it's difficult to troubleshoot if it fails because SPE or not.
Yeah. By the way, there we can see master HANA host 1, if you're interested. Any other questions? Sorry? If you email me, I know the presentations of the whole thing is going to be available online after SUSECON. But if you don't get the right details or you need some details, you're more than welcome to email me. And I'll also share, if you want, the actual guides. These come out of the stock standard guides that SUSE actually provide. That's why I say training is so important. If you go in the training, you can perform all of these steps. But you're more than welcome to email me and I'll share with you whatever you need. All right. That it? Thank you. Thanks for staying late, by the way.